Take a moment to reflect. What challenges do you face when implementing active learning in your own teaching? Or what concerns do you have as a student who is asked to participate in active learning? Let's have a look at the common concerns instructors tend to express about active learning. Most commonly, instructors are concerned about time. How can control be regained once everyone is talking? What if these activities run long and take over valuable class time? Instructors also tend to be concerned about student participation. What if students refuse to participate? What if they resist, complain, or evaluate teaching poorly as a result of introducing active learning? On the other hand, students also express concerns about active learning. Sometimes they just want to sit back and listen. This is especially common if active learning dominates and students become tired of that approach. Students also tend to question the purpose of active learning and can get upset when it's not clear to them how they're being evaluated. The good news is that there are some strategies and some fundamentals that you can use as an instructor to help mitigate this list of concerns. First, one consideration is to consider how students' cognitive load can be managed during active learning so that it is not overwhelming for them. By cognitive load, I mean the cognitive demands of a task. We can all identify the feeling of being overwhelmed, frustrated, and disengaged when learning gets too complex. There is a balance to be struck between the complexity of the content with the complexity of the learning activity. Here's the inverse relationship. When the content is complex, a familiar or simple learning activity is best. Whereas when the content is familiar or simple, a new or more complex learning activity can be utilized. What you want to avoid is a complex learning task with a complex set of content or material. It can simply become too overwhelming. This first consideration really points to the design of active learning. So the types of activities you are incorporating into classroom time, what you're facilitating, and how that relates to the content. But what about more of the facilitation side of active learning? Let's look at some strategies for introducing and implementing active learning at more of that facilitation end. Here are some of the basic facilitation tips to consider when implementing active learning. First, set the stage early for active learning by incorporating activities into the very first day of class. This sets the precedent that active learning will be a component of the course. Next, clarify the purpose of activities by connecting them to your learning outcomes, and then consistently making it clear why students are being asked to take this approach in class. Be explicit with instructions and what students are being asked to do. Further, every active learning technique should be debriefed somehow. This means following up, clarifying, or correcting where needed. Finally, you'll want to be clear about how your assessment practices relate to the active learning activity being conducted in class. How are students being measured? Not only do you want to explain the purpose of the activity and your expectations of students' participation, but you will also want to manage their participation effectively through facilitation strategies. This involves establishing a routine for yourself by designing course activities for participation and then introducing this engagement slowly in incremental steps. So for example, on the first day of class, icebreaker activities that warm students up to participating with one another will go over a lot better than, say, a complex activity that draws on numerous course concepts. Students just aren't really warmed up for that yet. When your class is engaged in an activity, you'll want to walk around the room and listen in on to see how students are doing. Do they understand? Is any clarification needed? If you notice that some students are disengaged, it's better not to ignore their non-participation, but rather to address it head-on by individually encouraging them to get involved. Maybe they need some help in linking up with a group or in starting the conversation. Wherever possible, grade students on their participation. In smaller classes, this might be accomplished through your own observation, and record keeping, but in larger classes, other approaches like clickers or exit tickets may be required to create that record. One last tip. I mentioned previously that active learning ought to be debriefed. One important thing that you can do as an active learning facilitator is to encourage reflection on learning. What did the students learn? What will they take away? What skills were practiced that are transferable to other contexts as students continue to learn and apply their knowledge? Metacognition is thinking about thinking, or reflecting on learning, and it is an important final step to the active learning process. With that, I'll leave you with one final question. What's one way you could grow as a facilitator of active learning in your own teaching? This week, you'll have the chance to put this to practice in your micro-teaching mini-lesson.